So I want to ask us what creates a mainstream cultural epicenter in society. I mean, there are a lot of different factors that certainly play a role, but I think there are some that we can all agree on. Things like grand beauty, architectural monuments, public celebrations, and high-energy experiences. Now, of course, I don't mean to suggest that the Large Hadron Collider is a roller coaster, but I have really felt that CERN and Disney ought to have partnered and that this could have made for quite the roller coaster concept. So why haven't science labs gone mainstream the way that some of these other places have? That's a question that's been of great interest to me as somebody who's very biased and has a deep appreciation for the laboratory as a space not only producing science, but with an associated culture. I've taken time to visit and work at laboratories close to urban epicenters and also at some of the more far-flung places on Earth. And personally, I find that there is a tremendous meaning associated with existing in the physical spaces where some of the biggest, most profound breakthroughs on the nature of reality are actually being discovered. So I've really returned to this question of what the laboratory is in society in the last year or two in particular, because I can sense that meta-science is having a moment. We have a funding crisis in science, of course, where there are extreme federal pressures to funding models for traditional scientific labs. And we, of course, have these new paradigms coming into play: AI scientists, fully automated laboratories. Within this landscape, we also have growing public distrust, where as recently as 2004, 42% of Americans would agree with the statement that scientists don't know how to communicate with me. And I think many would agree that this public distrust is part of what is then fueling the funding crisis. And in a funding crisis, there's suddenly this vacuum and room for new paradigms to emerge in how we conduct science. And if those paradigms aren't aligned with broader society, this may in turn fuel additional public distrust. Of course, there are other ways that new paradigms are entering the picture as well, but I really think we need to be careful as we rethink the 21st century laboratory to consider in almost a bold and even whimsical way what that picture of the laboratory as a place looks like and feels like. Today, I find that although outreach efforts in traditional scientific labs are wonderful, I'm supportive, they tend to be very constrained and minimal. Even the word itself, outreach, seems to imply within it this notion of kind of reaching out from behind some sort of wall. True story from a lab local to Boston that does open houses twice per year. Tickets sell out in minutes. And in their twice per year emails, they write, "Don't worry, if you don't get a ticket to this event, we'll see you eventually." This is like the exact opposite. And you know, there are reasons. When you speak, I've spoken to many of these laboratories. Funding constraints, staff constraints, cultural constraints. I mean, there are tons of reasons why the current kind of bureaucracy is pitted against us doing an overhaul of the science lab. And that's really what I'm here to propose as the beginning of a conversation. Now, what about the future lab? I think if you speak to STEM experts today, this is the kind of picture that's becoming more and more widely believed. And I think sentiment among STEM experts ranges from really strong excitement about the new levels of automation in science and the possibility that this is actually going to yield some kind of fundamental breakthrough in our understanding of reality and what's possible. And at the other extreme, you also have kind of a resignation among some, like, well, this is kind of inevitable. And to be clear, I'm tremendously supportive of the new wave of AI scientists and automation. I'm very excited also about the idea of living through some kind of Kuhnian moment in science, perhaps. At the same time, I want to challenge this picture and ask us if this is really the science lab of the future, drifting more and more towards kind of an inhuman factory in terms of its experience. So I mentioned earlier in the talk my kind of quip about the Large Hadron Collider being that perfect roller coaster concept. And, I want to even go further there just for getting a point across. If Disney has the 7 dwarfs, could we potentially have the 6 quarks? I think that we could consider, as a toy model, let's say, a for-profit theme park with hard science attractions, maybe photon bumper car optical tables, or Martian gravity simulators, or riding telescope experiences, coupled with a real on-site science lab, nonprofit of course, where the for-profit theme park proceeds fund the real on-site science, and all of this embedded in something that looks and feels more like a town square. Now, of course, I recognize that this is kind of like a bit of a whimsical picture. I'm using this to point us in a direction of open-minded consideration. Disney's experience unit operating income was $10 billion this year, about the same cost as the James Webb Space Telescope. So what would adding a few extra zeros to scientific funding do to the experience of the scientist and the discoveries we make? Now, I actually also think that there is evidence that there's a public warmth to this kind of direction. For example, in labs that have been friendly to treating the grounds as a place in society, like Fermilab, people from the local communities come to a particle physics laboratory to fish, to ride their bicycles, and even to spectate a herd of bison that are on the grounds, all with a particle physics lab in the background. And in the few occasions, like in early 2020s when Fermilab closed its grounds, there were huge movements from the public protesting and insisting that these grounds be reopened so that the scientific laboratory, once again, becomes a place for experience and human cultivation of meaning. Getting back to this supposed tension between automation and humanization, I actually don't know that these are in conflict. I believe that even as our experiments grow more and more automated, that next-gen laboratories could potentially grow more and more human and become increasingly powerful epicenters of meaning in our human landscape. But we, as a society, need to elect to design them this way from the ground up. So I want to propose a few near-term and far-term actions. One category of step we can take involves running experiments recasting existing labs as civic spaces. This is a program I run called Cycle to Science. It maps in detail bicycling routes to various really cool scientific sites around Greater Boston, like telescopes and submarines and climate observatories, partnering with all of the new urban planning movements around bicycle infrastructure, rails to trails initiatives, converting old railroads to pedestrianized routes, all about making these somewhat further flung scientific sites feel like an extension of the city that we live in. And I hope to gradually expand this program outside of Boston, and I think that there are many other such experiments that could be run. We can educate ourselves about the organizations that are popping up to challenge traditional funding and organizational models in science. Here are a few random examples I've been aware of. There are many out there starting to run experiments. I'm excited about hard sci as a contrast to sci-fi, looking, if you work in, say, entertainment and media, looking at opportunities to bring real science into the mainstream media that is consumed. There's companies out there, there's a lot. There's companies developing on-demand shooting stars, space platform. There's the famous black hole from Interstellar that is based on genuine physical modeling of a black hole. And there are at least 1 or 2 tools out there bringing the latest and greatest VFX tool sets to scientists so that the images that scientists come out with are as good as what you would see in the movies. And finally, you can join me and others who I think are increasingly reflecting on how to build new types of scientific ecosystems for the 21st century. I've mentioned a couple of ideas in passing here, things like for-profit, non-profit hybrids, and urban planning experiments I think would be very fresh terrain to talk about and explore. So coming back to this idea of the town square and the automaton, we're rebuilding the laboratory for a new era, or at least we have the potential to do so. And I think to the extent that we want to use the metaphor of a scientific cathedral, I think we want to look for that balance between automation and civic presence. So thank you very much.